Well, hello everyone. You know, I don't know how many years ago, the very first course I ever taught while I was still a graduate student was Introduction to Logic. And that course has transformed at many universities from simply a course on logic per se into what's called critical thinking. And I've come around to the view that the critical thinking course not only should be obligatory, absolutely mandatory for every college student, it ought to be pushed down into high schools. It ought to be a mandatory course in high school. And there are so many examples of why I think this, but I want to share one that's just really gotten under my skin. Of course, it's a very significant issue, but it's gotten under my skin irrespective of how significant it is in our society. And that is this whole dispute arising from the so-called big lie over what is being euphemistically referred to as election integrity. So here's the way this dispute is often presented. On one side, there are the people who push the big lie, that is, the utterly unfounded, totally false claims that the 2020 election in the United States was subject to massive voter fraud. Millions of people illegally voted, massively. And the response typically has been there's absolutely no basis for that, no evidence. It's totally unfounded, factual. And then the dispute, fairly enough, becomes a fight over facts. Was there fraud or not? And then because they say there's fraud, those who push the big lie are now pushing hundreds throughout the United States, hundreds of different bills that will have the effect of making it harder for people to vote. And this is supposed to be a reaction to election fraud. And the typical response from the other side is, but there was no fraud, there was no fraud. But here's where critical thinking would push this dispute further and should clear it up even more. Forget the factual dispute. Assume for the moment that, contrary to all reality, there was voter fraud. Look at the bills they're proposing, the statutes they want to enact. In what way would these statutes reduce fraud? An example, in Georgia, one of the reforms pushed was to not allow water to be provided to people waiting in line to vote. How does giving someone water in any way contribute to any potential form of fraud? No one's identified a causal connection between drinking water and voter fraud. Fewer, fewer, shorter hours is another. Relatively shorter hours in some form or fashion, like fewer early voting days, etc. But in what way does voting at a particular time of day or a particular day of the week contribute to fraud? If it's not likely to be fraud if you vote on the traditional election day, which is always a Tuesday, isn't it ridiculous? Not a Saturday or Sunday, but a Tuesday. In what way is it less likely to be fraudulent if you vote Tuesday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon rather than the previous Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning. No one's identified a causal connection between voting in a particular day and fraud. There is, and that's where critical thinking comes in over and over again. So many of our disputes just literally make no sense. I'll give you another one. There's an argument by certain conservatives that they're being canceled by Facebook and other social media. And they say that this should not be allowed to happen. And they say that they want to get rid of Section 230 because they think that will help them get rid of this cancel culture coming, or this censorship coming from Facebook. Section 230 says that social media companies cannot be held for the posting on their site by other people. In other words, if someone gets on Facebook and defames someone else, Facebook is not going to be held responsible as the publisher of that defamation. So, assuming that Facebook is censoring these conservatives on the basis that they think these conservatives are engaged in defamatory language or lies, how is getting rid of Section 230 going to make them censor less? They'll censor more. If they are going to actually be held responsible for what people say on their site, they're going to censor the heck out of people. So the supposed solution to the supposed problem is exactly causally unconnected. It's the exact opposite of a proper solution if there were such a problem. Notice, I'm not even getting into that, whether there's a problem, but simply that the proposed solution, again, makes no logical sense. If we would just study critical thinking, the world would be a better place. Okay? Thank you.